Hi, I'm Carolyn Gage, and I'm interviewing Joelle Taylor today, and I'm so so pleased to be able to do that. Um, Joelle Taylor has just won one of the top poetry awards in the West, the English-speaking world. It is the T.S. Eliot Poetry Award. And we're going to talk about that more later, but I want to just say give you a brief bio of her. Joelle Taylor is an award-winning poet and author who, prior to the pandemic, completed a world tour with her collection Songs My Enemy Taught Me. She founded Slambassadors, the UK National Youth Poetry Slam Championships, as well as the international spoken word project Borderlines. She's widely anthologized, the author of 4 collections of poetry, and is currently completing her debut collection of interconnecting short stories, The Night Alphabet. Her new poetry collection, Kanto and Other Poems, was published in June 2021 and is the subject of the Radio 4 Arts documentary Butch. Kanto has been shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize 2021. It hasn't been shortlisted. It frickin' won. It's everybody just packed up and went home. They don't, yeah, they're just like, you know. All right. Which has been named by the Telegraph, the New Statesman, the White Review, and Times Literary Supplement as one of the best poetry books of 2021, as well as Divas Magazine's Book of the Month, and awarded 5 stars by the Morning Star. She has received a Changemaker Award from the South Bank Center. A lot of this is referencing the UK, just FYI. A fellowship of the RSA, and her poem Valentine was highly commended in the Forward Prize. She is a co-curator and host of Outspoken Live, the UK's premier poetry and music club, currently resident at the South Bank Centre, and she's the commissioning editor at Outspoken Press 2020 to 2022. All right, that's really impressive. And I just want to say she didn't get on my radar until she won this prize, which is the main value of that. I can't believe I didn't know your work. How the F did that ever happen? I don't know. But I want to say that encountering her work is one of the most exciting artistic experiences of my life. Being 70, I don't have too many of those. And this one blew me away. And I just, when someone takes what's inside them and they can bring it out with such just laser-like accuracy and artistry, it's like, I just felt like, sometimes you don't know you're dead till suddenly you get really a jolt. Like I felt like her poetry is sort of like these paddles, they put on you when you're dead, and they run the juice through you, and you're just like, oh my God, that is the kind of thrill and excitement that I get. Especially there's a lot of YouTube videos of her doing her poetry, and so if you're like me and you didn't know her work, yeah, you are in for a treat. It's just life-giving and life-saving. One of my mentors is Toni Cade Bambara, African-American activist, etc., but also author. And she said that, we're in the business of salvation. Yeah, to save
That's a
lives.
beautiful quote.
Yeah, and I just thought of that when I was hearing your work. It was like, you're saving lives. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I have all these notes and they suddenly don't make any sense. What I want to say is, let's talk about the significance of such a, it's kind of like in the U.S., the American Book Award or something,
Yeah,
where it's like a
yeah.
Pulitzer type of thing. What does it mean when a lesbian butch uh, miraculously achieves that kind of recognition?
I mean, there are great photos of the very moment where it was announced, and you can see how physical a moment it was. It was very physical. I was like going forward, kind of almost being sick. But behind me, all these butches had jumped in the air. So as if people were like airbound, you know. It's a huge significance because we don't appear in the literary canon, you know, as butch lesbians anyway. I can't think of another butch dyke in terms of poetry, certainly in the UK, who's been given this kind of a
Well,
stop.
first off, everybody go buy her books, whatever. But Kanto, especially, that is, they give the award for a work, right?
Yeah, so it's for the book Kanto and Othered Poems, which is about the life of butch dykes, and specifically it's kind of memoir. So it's a lot about the life I used to live and the friends I used to have who've now passed on. But it's also a conjuring, so it's kind of magic realist as well. So I create different worlds that are set inside museum display cases. So the main body of the book is about a bar called the Maryville, which is this kind of sacred space in which we were safe, you know, and a lot of the book talks about threat and it talks about safety. So it's an unusual thing to come to the attention of a big literary award. When I actually got shortlisted, I cried so much it killed my hangover completely. So like, if you have a terrible hangover, get nominated for something, sorts you right out. But nobody expected it. I didn't expect it to win. I spent the time preparing my losing face and just trying to get as much out of the sort of moment, if you like. There was a couple of months before the winners were announced. And it was only at the couple of weeks before, suddenly people started talking about the book all the time. So I think there was a lot of people.
There's a couple of things. First, I want to say she named the book Kanto, obviously, you know, Kanto. But you know, it's spelled with a plus sign but just the courage to do that, like, well, here's an unpublishable title, if ever there was one. Are you not having enough difficulty getting your work out anyway? Like, yeah, call it Kanto.
Exactly.
You know, that is just going to be a lead balloon right there. Thank you for that. And that's the power of it. You're like, oh, you can't do that. It's like, watch me.
Exactly. Why can't I say this word? Why can't it be here? Why can't I own my own mouth? Why can't we own our own narratives? And really, like the titles, really have to commend the publishers, Westbourne Press, because they were resolute about keeping it, no matter what anybody else said. They had to remain Kanto. I wanted to put the plus sign in because I was like, because then if I'm on radio, I can say it differently, and then I'll be on radio. Whereas,
so what do you say? What do you say?
I just call it Kanto. But if like it's a school group or something, then I would say Kanto, just because, you know.
Oh, I would hear that. It would go in and sort of translate to Kanto. So, yeah. I wanted to say two more things. One was, I love the thing you said. It was where you said, you know, that you talked about the spaces, the women's bars, and you said we were handsome. You said outside the door, you know, we were whatever, invisible, or, you know, the outcasts, and we walk in the door and we are handsome and we're home. And I just loved how clear that is, how night and day, like we walk through the door. And I remember the first time I was in women's spaces, all of my mental health issues, they didn't disappear. There was no context for them to exist.
Yes.
So I experienced myself as waking from a dream. It wasn't like, oh, I had a headache and it just went away. It was just like, I have never had any mental health issues ever.
There you go.
And then
really important point.
I get in my car and I drive to a gas station. I'm like, oh, look at that cute dog. It's like, oh, that's a man. And all the mental health issues are back. Instant. I open that door and it's like, I'm crazy, you know. But
exactly.
I love that. And I also wanted to say, you do have a foremother in Judy Grant.
Thank you.
And I felt that, you know, when she had the, what was the name? It was a bunch of women.
Oh, the common women.
Yes, a common woman
Common
is as
woman.
common as a loaf of bread and will
Yeah,
rise. But then the common women poems, she is profiling the butch women.
yeah.
No, I
Edward the
remember
Dyke. I
car
seem to recall.
mechanics and what women are doing with their anger, and then women that just fade out, and just all the ways we deal with our oppression. Um,
Mm,
and when you were reading Valentine, and there was another one where you profiled the women in Kanto, I'm believing. See, Kanto
yes.
is this. You have five butches that, right? There are five different
Yeah,
women.
four of them. The four.
But
The,
that I
the
just
four, but
immediately thought of the common women. I'm like, like, my God, we actually have just the faintest thread of the beginning of a tradition from which we can build on.
yeah, and I remember reading I've got them here, the Judy Graham books, and Another Mother Tongue she wrote as well. I read them when I was like 17. I shoplifted them from somewhere and read them. So as I was doing Kanto, there is that sense of her voice being at the back, and just how powerful it was to me to be in that, to grab that book and to open it. Same thing as a door. You open the book and it's a door, and on the inside you're handsome. Like, she made what I was feel alive.
And I remember that she
Like,
wrote, I think she had a home assault or something that she wrote about, but she said fear tells women to stay inside and lock the door, and then it climbs in the window. And I have never forgotten that. I mean,
my God.
that's a beauty of poetry. It's just this, just we open the door and we're handsome. Like, it's a compression. And I work in
Yeah,
theater where the compression is you sit in a chair and all happens. You create a world, you take us on an odyssey, and it happens in 120 minutes. And there's
yeah,
extreme compression in theater, but it's not anything like the compression of a sentence, of a phrase that you have. And I remember you have this poem about seeing a family at the table, and you said, and the sister's eating herself.
mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
I weighed 85 pounds through high school.
Wow.
Yeah, people would register with shock. My knees were wider than my thighs, and it wasn't anorexia because I knew exactly what I looked like. I didn't like how I looked. I didn't think I'm too fat at all. I knew I looked like a skeleton, but I
Mm,
didn't remember the sexual abuse.
yeah,
But I was telling the story somewhere.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Your body's an
but
archive.
when you just said that, the little girl, what's the line about eating herself?
Is this in
It's
Kanto or in?
it's a glimpse of a family at the table, and nobody noticed that the daughter was eating herself. It
Yeah,
was just that
yeah.
one line, and I just, again, it was like the
This
paddles.
is it. Yeah, here's us at the dinner table. We are smiling like carved meat. No one notices that the daughter is eating herself.
Oh, Jesus, it was like, thank you, because that it wasn't anorexia. I didn't know how to. Um, it's actually called food refusal, but it's a prisoner of war behavior. But I didn't know how to articulate it. And when somebody else says your truth better than you can even know it, it's just life-giving.
Mm,
I mean, that was my childhood. I was eating myself in plain view.
yeah, so
Yeah, in plain view. Just, and I love that you said that your mission was returning voices back to the silenced.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that gives me a little bit too much power, the way I phrase that. But the idea is, that people on Earth challenge your own silences and and own your narrative, tell your story. I think the most important thing we always talk about, certainly in poetry and spoken word, we talk about, providing platforms for people to speak on. So reclaiming your voice, reclaim your voice. But we've also got to reclaim listening. And I think that's something we leave out of the dynamic a little bit. But I think it's the role of every artist, no matter what field we work in, particularly if we're from marginalized backgrounds, that whatever happens to us, we pass on. Like, the pen is a baton and the microphone's a baton, and you have it, look behind you to see who you're going to pass it on to. And that's how counterculture develops and evolves and that's how we help each other. And to go back to the door thing, so there's a lot of attention on this book now in the UK, and it's just about to launch, I think, in America. Because of that,
are you
giving us another door. So I've got it slightly open, and I'm trying to bring as many butch artists as possible in the room with me. So I'm working with Roman Manfredi, Butch Dyke, who does all the photographs, and just trying to collaborate with people like Rebel Dykes, who've got this brilliant film called Rebel Dykes you need to check out. You'll be able to find it online. And it's about the same period of history in London, and the squats and the leather dykes, and the sex wars.
I remember I came out in 85. I remember the tail end of those, but I went a different route because I'm a rural girl. And so I went into the women's lands for a decade to decolonize. I had 2 degrees in theater, and I was never studied a single work of a woman playwright.
Do you know, I had exactly the same experience. I did a theatre degree as well. And I did the same thing as you. And just about every dyke I know has done this at some point, where you realise that you've been colonised, that every word in your head's been written by a man, and a man who probably doesn't even like you. So I went to a period of only reading women authors, only women's stuff. All of my friends, I didn't know any straight people, let alone kind of, everybody was a dyke that I knew. And that was a kind of, what Lisa Lux called the economy of sisterhood. So you create this, whether you're in the rural women's land spaces or you're in the squats of Brixton, you're still creating this counterculture that's just dependent on dykes. Absolutely. And it wasn't like I specifically thought to myself, I shall not have any male friends from now on. I didn't do that. It was literally libido, number one, has a massive part to play because we're lesbians. People don't really talk about the fact that we too have libidos, and so you're always attracted to what you're attracted to, and you create a world around that. And because you're constantly under threat, because you have that sense of fear, you know how to watch out for each other. In that bar where I used to hang out, call it the Maryville, I was probably the only artist in that space. We're all working class, but like we all helped each other, whatever the work was. So when I set up the first slams and I didn't have anyone to help me put on the gigs, there'd be, a bunch of butch dykes would come and help me put the set up, because we caught each other. And that's what I feel we're missing.
I had a theater company in the 80s called No to Men, which is really
excellent.
That's the most autistic thing I may have ever done. I was in a small rural area, deeply homophobic, and that just struck me as a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
3 years later, I had to move to another state, and it did not end well. But I would say I was in a bar, and it was the butches. They were coming in and helping me with the makeshift, the lighting with flashlights, and but the can-do attitude is phenomenal. Oh yeah, we can get that, we can do that. And
because also we're at my age, 54, we're the daughters of punk rock, and the punk movement politicized a generation of working class women. It really did. And it gave lesbian and gay people at the time, as we were, lesbian and gay people an education, and that we were welcomed. So whilst punk looked very aggressive in real terms, it was much more about sharing ideas and philosophies, and making clothes and putting on your own theatre and squatting and resisting this. And I think that's a really important. I'm wondering what's happening now, because I think that social media has atomized the lesbian and gay, the LGBT movement. There's and the atomization is leading to a lot of conflict, and there's an anonymity on social media. So I've argued with people and getting really, really, really upset, and then suddenly you realize you're probably arguing with a 13-year-old, in the back bedroom in Wisconsin, and you're like, why am I doing this? Why am I investing in the disruption of my own community? So
I think that's true, and I think the online community is like kind of an oxymoron. It's like Not the community, like, when we built the theater and the bar, and, or, you're talking about the squats and I mean, these were communities. And
Mm,
in the 80s, women who were, eschewing the company of men took a huge financial hit. We really depended on each other for all of our social needs, our cultural needs, our
yeah.
survival needs. It was, and I think that time is, yeah, the atomizing of the community is very, very painful, I think.
Yeah, and in London we have one bar left, one lesbian bar, and I think that's so. At the time is the book is set in, I mean, there was multiple
Yes,
catering to all kinds of different women for different, different spaces that we wanted to occupy because they're sacred spaces. And even during the sex wars, which you would see if you watch the Rebel Dykes film, there's a very famous conference that happened at the Lesbian and Gay Centre, where all the sort of SM leather dykes and then all the lesbian feminists got together to argue around, to argue about sadomasochism and its place within the lesbian movement, and just to kind of discuss it. The point is, they were absolutely at war, but they still got together in the same room, and there's film of it, and everyone's actually talking. People aren't going hysterical. There is something really important about physical space. We talk a lot at the moment about safe spaces and that kind of thing. I don't know if you recall, I think it's important to have big intersectional spaces where everyone can come in, but I also think it's really important to have some separate spaces as well.
I
You know,
find that when people define a space as safe, I know I will be silenced in that place, and that I am most at risk there of any place as an artist.
there you go.
Yeah, and honestly, there are no safe spaces. There are people that have functional communications skills and a commitment to respect, period.
Mm,
But yeah, there's
yeah,
going to be wild disagreement. There's going to be misunderstandings. There's going to be people. There will be autistic people who don't read social cues. And oh my God, people project all kinds of shit on us. It's like, check your neurotypicalness, please.
yeah, for real, for
Yeah.
real. So,
And also intergenerational. The bars is where I met those old, they don't like this.
mm,
And often they were advanced in alcoholism.
yeah,
And I have a piece, Calamity Jane sends a message to her daughter, that I wrote as an homage to those women. Scary, self-deprecating,
mm,
don't miss a thing. Any slightest whatever of contempt, they're just razor sharp, possibly stumbling and falling, but absolutely politically razor sharp.
mm,
They were just, but where are you going to meet those online? Or like, it's like, no,
exactly.
the actual spaces was where intergenerational
Yeah.
communication happened.
What
And I,
I'm seeing in the UK is a really big sense that the younger generation are starting to realise what they've lost, or what was taken from them. What
Mhm.
was taken from them. They've been very committed to their online communities, but now there is a sense that this book is a part of a movement where we're saying we need to come back together. There's generalized threats are massively on the increase. I've just had an interview with someone in Liverpool where there's been several attacks on gay men, murders
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
I read about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're saying like the whole gay community, the part of town with the gay bars, feels incredibly unsafe for gay people, and they don't want to go there. So there's a resurgence in homophobia, an absolute resurgence,
Sometimes when
and we
I,
know about
this,
Chechnya,
oh
Hungary.
my God, yes, yes, yes.
There is a film called Welcome to Chechnya that I think it's available on Netflix or other streaming platforms, and it's just footage of what's happening. And that was one of the most horrendous 24 hours of my life. It took a long time to finish the film because it's incredibly upsetting. But there you can see, footage taken a few months ago or a year or so ago of lesbians and butch dykes being murdered in the streets. And that's 5 hours from where I live by plane. That's really close. It's just mainland, you know, Eastern Europe. So I think there's a real sense that we need to get these spaces. these churches, these women's lands as well, to resurrect all of our ghosts, all come back together again.
In some ways, I feel like what is happening to lesbian butches and butches that are older is the missing generation of gay men that
Yeah,
came out with me, and they're gone. They died of AIDS. There was a true epidemic. And I feel like they hit that first wave of women's liberation too. They went through it with us because we called them out. They had
yeah,
respect for our battles. They had our back, and we certainly showed up for AIDS.
yeah.
Lesbians were huge, and I feel like the absence of their voice has absolutely. They had our back, and then they're gone, and I feel like the
This is
hatred and the ageism.
such a good point, Carolyn. I'd not thought of that. But I mean, I talk about being in the club in the book and seeing people disappear.
Yeah.
But what's
They
the
would
effect
stand
of us
up.
now?
The people that are censoring our voices and canceling us, those men in their 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean, I think older, maybe toward the 80s, there was a lot of misogyny historically in female culture. But my peers, the women's movement, they were in it with all the other movements of the 60s. And I just feel like they would not tolerate the way gay men and queer culture are treating
Yeah,
lesbian feminists and older women. I just think they would just be
yeah.
like, wait a minute.
Mm.
But that absent it's made it open season on lesbian hating.
It's such a good point. It's such a good point to make because, yeah, there's
It's a
a hole
generation
in
of
history.
gay
Mm.
men, and they shared the horrendous oppression that happened before
Yes.
Stonewall and whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had allies, and they died. I think it's important to remind people of that. We are in patriarchy, and that was one of the few thin, like the thin little barrier between us and the just tidal waves of misogyny.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm just making a note about what you've just said.
ooh, make it a
Missing generation
poem.
of gay men.
Make it a poem. Um, I
Yeah.
have to tell you, like, since I discovered your poetry, I just been walking around crying. Now,
God
I don't
bless you.
know why does powerful poetry that really, um, I don't know, it's sort of like if you're in a room and somebody's like singing a note, that chord in the piano will start to vibrate. You are just, I vibrate with what, yeah, I don't know, but that's a gift.
Thank
I'm
you.
not even, I'm like, oh, what the fuck is happening to me? It's like, oh, you've been reading this woman's poetry and you've been hearing her recite it. And I don't know why I'm just wanting to walk around and weep.
I think we hold so much as butch lesbians and as lesbians in general. We hold all the time. And it's just so good
Your
to
work
say.
is an active witness, and it's not just, like I say, when the butches are safe, everybody's comfortable. And I
Mm,
feel like your voice is witness to the lesbian butch pain. And in that, everybody is free to open those gates of what's been done to us and is
mm,
being done to the whole planet. And
mm.
I just, wow, I just feel like crying talking to you right now. It's just like, it's just an amazing thing.
I've been touring the book, and obviously there has been a lot of crying. I cry as well. But one of the best things is that once the crying stops, everybody starts to stamp and cheer because it's a release. And I don't deliberately go around trying to make people cry. But it is the sense that you're
Need to
saying,
fucking cry. If we grieved the species that disappeared off the planet in the last 7 days, if we could grieve it, if we could feel it, we would
mm,
stop doing it. I feel like when you don't do grief, you dissociate. And we have computers now, which makes it's like pouring a
yeah,
drink for an alcoholic. It ramps the dissociation. No, I think the fact that you make people that are pretty hardened and in there, cry it's the it's in Maine, we have a thing called ice out when the rivers start to move. And you can tell, like 5 days upriver, the ice is going out. So, and, it'll be here by Wednesday. And it's noisy, it's destructive, it takes out bridges, but it moves. It's like
Yeah.
everything's moving. And I feel like the excitement of ice out, and oh my God, this is going to overrun the banks and God knows what it's going to take out. I feel like your poetry is like, you hear it, you can hear it coming. It's really noisy. It's like, oh my God, the ice is coming out now. It's ice is out. It's just so exciting.
Thank you.
But I don't want to do all the talking, and I knew that would be a occupational hazard. Please talk about Kanto.
So, and this kind of segues onto what you were saying about grief, and what I was saying about, we're holding it here all the time, and as butch women, we are very explicitly holding space. We're holding our bodies. We're holding grief in. And what started the book was I was asked to write a 10 to 15 minute poem that was going to be performed as part of a big event called Rallying Cry. And Rallying Cry had 5 poets all responding to the theme of protest. So they just gave me a theme, protest, 15 minutes. And I was missing people. I was on tour, and I was missing people who aren't here anymore. And then I started missing people I'd never met, and starting to really reflect on what protest meant to me. And that became the title poem, Kanto, which is my personal story in separate cantos of being a butch dyke and of sexual terrorism and survival, and how we all found each other and how we built a community, and then how we all died again. And it grew from there to this idea that I wanted to preserve really important parts of our history as dykes and as butches. So that led to the idea of museum cases, these vitrines that appear all across London, all across the UK, it could be America, but essentially they kind of appear or materialize outside of either colonized gay spaces like Compton Street in London, or, spaces that have been closed down, and cruising grounds and cottages, and squats. And the different sizes, so some are huge and might contain, the bombing of the Admiral Duncan. The smaller ones, which is like a perfect night out where somebody's just caught in the moment of dance. There's a museum of first kisses. And then there's a snow globe. And the snow globe has an entire dyke dive bar in it called the Maryville. And there are 4 butch dykes, Jack Catch, who's the eldest, one of these older dykes that you're talking about earlier on, the kind of cowboy dyke. And there's Dudzilly, who's a stud and is very concerned with suits, but it's much more about, in the stage play, we learn a lot about her journey to the UK. She's a refugee as well. And there's Angel, who's the young boy, very aggressive. She's, I'm sure we're all aware of kind of the violence that was in the bar scene, and Angel's very in that moment. And then Valentine, who's kind of the leather butch dyke sex god of the book and of the stage play. And it's the story of how a little bit about their lives, who they are, the women they love, the nights out, why it's important to be together in these sacred spaces. And essentially, something very small happens in the book, which is that somebody tries to get in the bar. And it happened a lot, I'm sure you remember. Certainly in the UK, it was quite regular. You'd be out in the gay bar, and then people would start banging on the windows or banging on the doors, or be waiting for you outside. So this is the idea of the men outside, whatever they are. Someone's trying to get in the space, and the butchers come together and they fight them off. That's essentially what happens. In the stage play, it's much more heartbreaking, because you were right when you said there are 5 butchers in the book. In the book, there's a random character called George, who's my best friend, Kaz, who died. Was the first butch I lost. And So I tell the story of how she died and the funeral and how we all came together. In the stage play, we get rid of Kaz, God bless you, and her story is absorbed by Angel, and Angel dies during the bar fight. So it's quite a magic realist book as well. It's not just kind of about the very real things that happen to Butch Dykes, like, you know, being stripped in the streets by police, or being constantly checked or correctively raped. You know, it's also about possibility and the incredible naughtiness of women. Like, I mean, I don't know about you, but we were very naughty.
Yeah, I felt that. Well, that was part of calling my theater company No to Men. I felt like
Yeah,
those are probably the three most dangerous words on the planet. And
exactly.
what would happen? Well, so you say you're doing women's theater, and everybody has a different idea of what that is. And as soon as you say, "Oh, my theater company is called No to Men," everybody's very clear what it is you're doing, and they want to kill you.
Yeah. No
And,
to Men.
and it was
The
really
No to Men is such a brilliant title.
so women that walked through the door, in my mind,
Yeah.
were all giants. They were
Yeah.
giants. If you came through the door of a theater called No to Men in a small rural town,
Yeah.
yeah, we could
Yeah.
work. They
Yeah.
inspired me. I was in, you know, relationships not so much, but I fell in love with a theater company, and it was heartbreaking. And I wanted to say that, you know, like you know, women being among ourselves and having our own space, sometimes the first time historically, it's not pretty. It can be not
Yeah.
pretty. As with any decolonized people, the first thing they do is start to tell the story of what's been done to them, and they tell it on each other. And then, of course, we protect that secret because we don't want the bad rap, like, oh, look at those women. But I felt like we're expressing the rage, and we're expressing
Yeah, they are, you're quite right. There's spaces to act out.
Mm.
And particularly say the Leatherdyke scene of London during that time, there was a real conscious understanding. It's not just about kind of sex and making the lesbian erotic, having, you know, sexual agency. It's about therapy. It's about working things out.
That
You
is,
know,
yes, and I love the spaces. And there were very few. There were places where the you know, the SM community was not welcome because we're feminists.
yeah,
And I always, and maybe because I'm a theater person, I wanted to be where we all were.
yeah,
Because I felt like whatever lesbians are doing, if they're calling each other daddy and wearing pajamas with feet in them or whatever they're doing is important.
yeah,
No, I may not agree with it. How do you not agree with it? It is.
exactly,
Everything that we
exactly.
do, and the absolute hatred and canceling of older lesbians right now is
Yeah,
very important.
it's
It's
one of the
not
reasons why I
it's
wanted to
oh, these
write the book.
people are idiots. It's like, no, it's like something, everything lesbians do, even when they're desperate to not be lesbian, is terribly important culturally.
Yeah,
It's
very
really
much so.
important. And I love that you're a bridge builder. And I just want to I know we're all doing like deep lesbian stuff here, but I am astounded that on top of everything else that you're just smashing your way through, ceiling after ceiling, that you are reaching out to youth and to refugee populations. She's doing poetry in the prisons, you guys. I mean, this woman is, wherever there's oppression, she's there. It's like you don't have enough to do with, you know,
I mean, you
time
know,
on your hands for every, you know, every
yeah,
oppressed
it's
group.
holistic, isn't it? Art is holistic. So you have to, there has to be this constant movement, like you were talking earlier. There has to be a dynamism in it, and there has to be a feeding. So if I do work in prisons, there is a sense, you know, it's not in a let me give back to the community kind of way. It's a kind of meeting of quite important energies, really important. Sometimes when I've worked with sex offenders, I'm a survivor of sexual abuse. The last thing I've ever wanted to do is be anywhere near those guys at all. But it just happened. I was booked to do an event. Nobody told me that these guys were sex offenders. I did Songs My Enemy Taught Me, which is a book about surviving sexual abuse, until every man in the room was either crying or writing something or responding or talking. And that bridge thing, bridges go both ways. So it meant that for the first time in my life, I could be a little more understanding of these men I hate. I could which it takes quite a lot of bravery, because you don't want to I don't want to like a rapist. I just don't. I just literally don't. So it takes a certain bravery to do that. But then how do you change these men's thinking and their privilege except by talking to them? So it's a difficult kind of dynamic to be involved in. But
That's like
in
an
terms of
act of astounding courage. I mean, you must have been drowning in PTSD when you realized it's like an ambush.
yeah, I was like, fuck's sake. But it was okay, because I mean, it was all right. It was a good thing to do. I mean, I won't deliberately go out and do it because I want to give to people who've survived these men, rather than necessarily work at rehabilitation for them. I've only got so much energy. But I think it's really important, the whole of art, this idea of us mentoring each other and working across everything. The word community, because of neoliberalism, because of the rise of this disaster capitalism, the word community is considered low art. I mean, that's absolutely crazy, because community is art. Do you see what I mean? Like,
Oh, you
it has to
can't.
be.
It's a context in which you create. And it's just like people pretending there's no context. It's sort of like pretending you've achieved all these things on your own efforts, and we
Yeah,
pull the curtain back and we see privilege here, privilege there. But that business of community, um, I find like the New York art scene staggeringly provincial. I can resonate with it because I live in small rural villages. I'm like, oh yeah, the village, literally the village. I
yeah,
think, but it elevates itself as a tastemaker for the universe or whatever. And that's no, you have a community. You've just declared yours the universe, and
yeah,
but we see you in my
yeah,
little fishing village. I see you. I see what you're doing. And honest to God, it wouldn't fly here because we're a little more universal than that, really, truly.
yeah.
Yeah, but I just digress.
That's fine.
But
Yeah, I
yes,
mean, look,
yes.
so you asked at the beginning about why it was important for a butch lesbian to win this big literary award with a book about butch lesbians, and I think it's not just about that. It's about those of us who represent this counter art, or a kind of resistant art, being rewarded. That was the sense I got from social media as it happened. Um, like a lot of people who've sent me, they're not dykes, and they're not
Yeah.
part of the LGBT community. They are members of working class communities or spoken word artists, and all the artists that are put down because their work does center the community, because the work has purpose. Poetry has purpose. It does things. It's a verb. It's not just something that lives in books or on a stage. It's active around us. It's air. So that was why it was an important moment as well. Not just because it was Butch Dyke, but because certainly in the UK, the history of Butch Dykes is the history of working class people as well. It's working class pub
I don't know how it
environment.
is now, but when I came out, anybody doing out lesbian culture was by definition working class, because you would not be middle class unless you're willing to closet yourself.
Mm.
And so and especially the butches, so visible. That was just like it was déclassé.
Yeah, excellent.
And it seemed like the butch women who were middle class or whatever, there was a sensible shoes, butt stockings. And yeah, it was just, to me, it was, yeah. But
Yeah,
I don't know if that's still true, but that was for a long time true. Like if you were really an out butch lesbian, you were working class slash poor, for sure.
yeah, yeah. And I think there was a sense of that as well in London during the 80s and 90s. That's why we were squatting. We had absolutely nothing, but we had each other, and that was a really, and as you indicated, there were a lot of fights, not necessarily physical fights, but there were, yeah, the community acts out against itself, you know, and like you said, all of our trauma does come out in these spaces. Only when you feel kind of safe does all the stuff start to
Yes,
unravel.
that is the ice out. It's not
Mm,
pretty. You
yeah,
know, it's breaking up and bringing things with it and breaking more and more as it moves down the river. You know, it
mm,
started out with a little crack, but by the time it's 5 miles down the river, it's a wall of ice that can take out a bridge. You know, it's like,
wow.
and I feel like, well, it's actually biblical. I mean, you know, when Moses took people out of Egypt, God said, you know, you're going to have to wander in the wilderness until that whole generation is dead, because you really wouldn't even know what to do if you were in the promised land. You'd probably trash it. And so we were building from the ground up. We were on women's land. We can have it
Yeah,
any way we want it. We're women. There's
yeah,
no men here, no patriarchy, and the it just, women had emotional access to each other, and we were enormously destructive, and I was among that
mm,
first generation out of Egypt. We did
yeah,
what we knew. We did hierarchy. We did um, witch hunting. We did scapegoating. We did
yeah,
tremendous emotional violence, but we were purging in the hopes that the generations after us could go into whatever it was we were trying so hard to do
mm,
with women's land, and to our
mm.
frustration, were unable to achieve. But I like to think that we broke the ice. You know, we started the movement.
Absolutely, absolutely. My generation benefited enormously from the lesbian feminist movement of the 60s, of course, 60s and 70s. I mean, we were probably the first generation, as bad as it was in terms of homophobia, lesbophobia, we were probably the first generation that could be out at some point
Yeah.
and declare ourselves. And instead of being on a march, actually, I had the luxury of going to a nightclub as
Mm.
dykes, you know, instead of, we were visible and we made ourselves more visible. Even of those of us who didn't identify as butch, shaved our hair off because hair was such a signifier of patriarchy and this idea of beauty, you know, and we created a new aesthetic. But all of us came from, you know, our foremothers and grandmothers, the bravest butches who walked by themselves through town, you know, women who always had to pass as male in order to survive. And also the massive lesbian and feminist movement, giving us access to ourselves. And there's always been a class issue, isn't there, with feminism? I know there's a lot of different issues that people have in terms of intersectionality.
I
Um,
love the way you really call out class issues. I mean, it's yeah,
it's vitally
middle
important.
class background here, but downwardly mobile hugely, because I was an out lesbian and I didn't know how to negotiate anything because I'm autistic. You know,
Yeah,
I don't social cues. Like, well, there's a way I can. No, there's never a way. You know, it's just like, here I am. I
yeah.
might as well call it no to men, because here I am.
It's just brilliant. But
But
it's that energy that is so inspiring. It's that approach to life, you know,
call
that,
it what it is, and also, like I say, those 2 degrees in theater with nothing about women. It had to be no to man. It's like, done.
yeah,
Time to meet
done.
a man. Done. You're not welcome here. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, something I just really I just really appreciate how much you're representing, and the butch truth, and that your poetry is just rooted in the body, in female anatomy. Oh, just like that is, I feel like that's the ground of it. Can you talk a little bit about that, and especially doing that as a lesbian butch artist?
Yeah, I mean, I
I
think it
mean, we
says it.
all know anatomy is so biologically essentialist, and it's a little retro, honey. And maybe
It's all a bit retro now,
let me
isn't it?
give you some books you should read. Actually, to me, postmodernism came in, and it was like, as a child with sexual abuse, it
Mm,
was very familiar.
yeah,
It was teaching me not to own my body. It's like, oh yeah, where'd I hear this before? I think I was 5, and then I stopped eating. But I mean, it was like crystal clear to me. This is a language of dissociation.
yes, exactly, exactly. So, I mean, as the female body is a political space, everybody argues over it. Everybody, you know, it's been a source of
Contested territory.
yeah, I mean, it's contested land, isn't it? Nobody actually knows who lives there. You know, women are saying, no, it really is my body. But, you know, even in 2022, that's clearly not what most people, of course, some people believe. So it's about that. It's about the fact that even to be born female or to be born woman, whatever that is to be born with a sense of exile, whether you're a butch dyke or not. It's very important. Eating disorders. So I had a refusal to eat as well. I refused to eat food as a child, and then I refused as an adult because I was trying to escape my body. I was trying to not be this target. I was trying not to be vulnerable. So then I started to see things that are female as ugly, not on other women, but on myself, because they were making me vulnerable. If I didn't have breasts, then nobody would grab them. You know, because you think in these really simple ways when you're younger. You don't think like, well, if I change the way people think about breasts, then they wouldn't grab them, you know. So I think it's the source of our oppression, our bodies, or, you know, some of our oppression.
It's certainly the cause of it. I mean, you know, the fact that men had to, in order to have children, to be immortal, it had to come through a woman. They had to ensure that it was them because there wasn't DNA testing. So there's marriage, there's ownership, there's literal ownership, control, and just all on and on. It just flows from there. And so when people are trying to act like my oppression is coming from my misunderstanding of postmodern concepts of gender, it's like, do you read history? Have you ever talked to your grandmother? What the fuck, you know, like.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time to be alive.
Yeah,
I do think two truths can exist in the same space, and I think it's necessary they do. To try to learn what, I mean, the postmodern understanding of gender and sex and sexuality.
I always just have to interrupt the discourse when people say postmodernism and say, do you know that Derrida and Foucault were public advocates for abolition of age of consent?
I know.
I feel like I need to say nothing more. If you're taking your philosophy from somebody who thinks it's a good idea to abolish age of consent, that raping a 9-month-old is fine.
Yeah.
I have nothing more to say. Like, that would be a touchstone of morality, of civilization, of humanity, of accountability. It's like, okay, that is like moral corruption at the core, and whatever philosophy flows from that, which of course the deconstruction of childhood, very similar to deconstruction of woman. It's just like, is this where you're taking your cues from? Is this where you're going to build a whole philosophy of life? People who think it's okay to abolish the age of consent. It's insane. It is a philosophy of dissociation, and I think it's rooted in pedophilia. Well, I'm going to shut up now because I'm on a rant here. So
that's cool. That's cool. Yeah. And I think it's really important to talk about all of these things, and you know, in a to try and learn.
Well, that's the excitement of your poetry, the body, and articulating just about the body, Kanto, just calling it Kanto. I just love that you never are very far from referencing that you will not be dissociated from it. Just in case, I had 2 sentences there and you might have thought I was getting a little, you know, out there with concept. Back to the body, back to the body, back to the body. That was like that was the life-saving electrical shock of your work over and over again, making me own my experience in the body. Uncomfortable, radicalizing, revolutionary, all of that is there in it. I just feel that's the body and the power of your work are can't be separated. And there's such a novelty now. I mean, it's like amazing that somebody's doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, but yeah.
Oh, thanks so much. I really enjoyed this talk. It's been great to sort of unpick history with you. Are you going to turn that into an article, or are you going to just release this?
I'd like to just put it up as is, partly because, oh my God, I'm in the middle of so many projects right now, and I like to not cherry pick what you say.
Okay, cool, 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 cool.
Are you all right with that? Well, I mean, I can send it to you first in case, there's something you're like, oh, that doesn't sound so good now or whatever. Yeah, I just, whatever
Probably sounds.
you want me to do with it, but
No, you do what you own it. Do what you need to do with it, and obviously I'll share it here and send it to my publishers, and once it's ready, and they'll share it as well, and hopefully get a bit more viewing. I've got another meeting in 10 minutes.
all right, let's wrap up, but I just want to give you, this is a platform, a particular one. Is there anything that you would like to say to people who, like, my work is, I have over 100 plays and 9 anthologies, and they're like 90% butch centric, and they're usually survivor centric. So I have a particular audience that you can kind of take your shoes off.
Okay, cool.
What would
Wicked.
you say
So I mean, all I want to say is that it's this. I'm just trying to honor courageous women. I want to note, honor, witness the battles we've all fought. And most of us have fought alone for the first part of our lives. Most of us have done this alone, and that creates a certain kind of woman, a certain kind of human being. And I want to honor that. I want to honor your tenacity and stamina, your good grace and humor, and to do not be ashamed. Dress up well, look good for each other, be handsome.
Oh my God. Well, that is the last word from Joelle Taylor, who is one of the handsomest butches I've ever seen. I had a little nervousness, little first date stuff before the interview, but her work is handsome also. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now.